Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation. Today, we are finding foodie joy on Zestology. I'm Tony Wrighton. Thank you for listening to the podcast all about energy and vitality. I'm walking around central London at the moment, and Eve Turow-Paul is the author of a new book called Hungry. So as I walk from A to B, let me tell you about the start of this podcast, and then we'll get into that interview with Eve. She's a brilliant guest. We talk quite a bit about diet tribes on this podcast and why diet tribes are so important and why diets make us feel so good. We talk about some of the different styles of eating that come into this podcast: low carb, keto, intermittent fasting. And I said to her, look, I don't really think these are a diet. I think it's kind of more like a lifestyle, and she agrees. We also talk about the importance of getting away from round-the-clock news. We talk about wellness retreats and plant parenthood and other methods of easing modern anxiety. We talk about eating local. A little bit of politics sneaks in as well. And honestly, Eve is absolutely brilliant. She's, I suppose she might not like this, but you might describe her as a millennial philosopher. I think she probably gets into the millennial bracket, whereas I don't. But listen, I hope you enjoy this. Let us find foodie joy with today's podcast and Eve Turow-Paul. Eve, we're recording now. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good.
I am managing pandemic, and we had a loss in the family, so I'm coping with that. And my baby girl, things are piling on, but at the same time, I am relieved that I spent the last 4 years doing research on well-being, because I have a number of tools in my toolbox that I can pull from right now. Yeah. And I am putting them to good use.
Well, you and I just had a quick chat before we started recording, saying how grateful we are for many reasons for having a baby, but not least the fact that it brings you right back to the present in the midst of very difficult times. You're forced to think about not much more than the latest nappy or the latest mealtime.
Right. And like just watching how excited she gets about rain or the reflection of something. Yeah. It really has kept me focused on the really small, beautiful things that I have even inside my home while quarantined inside. And also the potential of the future, thinking about this moment as a blip in a very long arc of human history.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned rain. Have you ever heard of Josh Waitzkin?
No, I have not.
He's a former chess champion, and the film and book Searching for Bobby Fischer was about him.
Oh yes. Oh, okay. I have seen Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yeah, he's brilliant, and he's written this brilliant book called The Art of Learning, which is absolutely fantastic. It's about how he became a champion chess player, and then he became a champion at Tai Chi.
Really?
And so he finds all the similarities between the two different disciplines, and he kind of draws the comparisons. And he said when he had his son, he said that he would consciously try and make his son excited about the rain in the way that most people are excited about a nice sunny day.
Yes.
Which is excellent in theory, but Eve, I'm in London. Sometimes, it's quite wet and cold, and it's hard to summon that same enthusiasm. But I want to. I really want. I'm totally on board with the idea.
We find that it makes for nice meditative moments in the morning when we
Oh,
stand in the doorway and look at the rain, and she
oh,
reaches her hand
lovely.
out to touch it. So
Oh, very nice, very nice.
yeah, yeah.
Now tell me about your new book. It's hungry, and it's all about diet and culture and psychology. I have a feeling you'd have a lot to say about some of the conversations we have about food on this podcast. But I want to hear first about the thinking behind the book and how it's all going.
Yeah, thanks. So I've been researching food culture, really like food trends for, I'd say, about 12 years now. It's a topic that I, kind of dabbled in, thinking maybe I'd write an article or something. And then once I dove into it, I became completely obsessed. And I still am, because it's a topic that's extremely complex, it's ever changing. And really, what I look at is not just what are the big food trends, but why. And I dive deep into the psychology behind the biggest food and lifestyle trends of today. And in Hungary, I had the chance to do research internationally, and spent a lot of time talking to academics. My job as a journalist is a great one. I'm constantly learning, and I just get to talk to really interesting, smart people about what they do, and learn from them. And so that's what I did for Hungary. I talked to evolutionary psychologists and biologists, anthropologists, sociologists. It goes on and on and on. And really, what I was looking at is, well, why is it that we have a non-GMO movement? Why is it that we have so many people in urban centers that are willing to pay $35 to go sit on a stationary bike in a room with other people? Why do we have a DIY movement in the midst of the digital revolution? And a lot of this work came down to investigating what makes our lives in this time period so unique. And this is prior to COVID. And so prior to the pandemic, that one main thing, and it still really is the impact of technology. And so a lot of Hungary is looking at the impact of tech on well-being and how that is driving people's food and lifestyle choices today.
Wow. Okay. I mean, this is just so interesting because obviously I am probably guilty of having paid a lot of money to go and sit in a room on a stationary bike with other people in the past. I'm totally on board with non-GMO food. A lot of the wellness trends and food discussions that we have on this program, I think, center around one theme, which is to try and get back to a bit more of a natural world, to try and kind of respect our ancestral roots and eat foods and meals that kind of respect where we've come from a little bit more. And that seems to tie in with what you were just talking about in terms of technology as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of what I have spent my time looking at is rising rates of anxiety and stress and burnout and loneliness and depression, which are all sky high right now, and questioning, well, what is it about our way of living that's driving those mental health maladies? And how can things like starting a paleo diet or going to CrossFit help us feel better? And I think a lot of what I would call foodie trends as well are things, or millennial trends, are things that are very easily made fun of in pop culture. But every single trend, if someone's deciding to spend their discretionary income and time on something, there is a legitimate reason as to why. There is something about that experience that is satisfying on a deeper level, even if we're talking about avocado toast.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of this, and we can dig into this, but we do have starkly high rates of, again, anxiety, loneliness, et cetera. And this is prior to the pandemic. A lot of the biggest food and lifestyle trends today are about this desire to find control. And when you're saying going back to the natural ways of being, I spent a lot of time in the first section of the book talking about the evolutionary benefits of knowing where our food comes from, or knowing the people who who grow our food, who at least sell it and can vouch for it. And a lot of the trends today are about saying, okay, society as a whole has handed off responsibility for things like our health and safety to government, big institutions. Today, there's record low rates of trust in government and big business. And so people are looking for ways to close that gap and take back control. And in many ways, it is saying, okay, we need to reverse course here and shift the trajectory that we've been on for the last 100 years as industrialization has rolled in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that part of what you were saying sounds very positive. The bit about control, I think there's an element of control that sounds to me to be negative and can be negative as well when one too tightly controls anything around food and diet. That can not have a positive impact.
Yeah, I mean, there's really this kind of fine line between choosing certain foods that give you a sense of autonomy over your own health and well-being, and then using food as a tool for control that is then wreaking havoc on your physical well-being. And one of the things that I spend a good amount of time talking about in the book, and that I've been researching for a long time now, is the eating disorder like behaviors that are reflected in the communities that partake in some of the biggest restrictive diet trends of the last 10 years. And that's not to say that we're a generation of disordered eaters. I don't think that we are. But food can be a mechanism for finding a sense of personal authority in your life. And sometimes that's taken to an extreme in which it becomes problematic. And sometimes it can be a really great coping mechanism for people. And if you're thinking about what the alternatives would be, I would say if it's shunning gluten from your diet is something that makes you feel better, then that's better than a lot of the alternatives.
Yeah. I mean, and what you were talking about in terms of knowing where our food comes from, there's a great pleasure in food, and it's not just in the moment of eating. It is in sometimes knowing where it's come from, appreciating its roots in the preparation and the planning of the food. I know we planned every meal during lockdown with great precision, and it was one of our principal joys, and it was absolutely lovely to spend more time thinking about cooking really lovely food, and that was a lot of the joy in it.
Yeah.
So it is nice to know where our food has come from.
Yeah, I mean, it's in part what I learned about is actually the evolutionary benefit of knowing where your food comes from. That was a survival thing, right? I mean, it makes sense that food will taste better if you know its origins.
Right.
Actually, food experiences a score in a lab setting as more satisfactory if we know who made the food. And that's because historically speaking, if you knew where your food was coming from, it was likely to be safer, right? You were able to judge at least whether it was safe or not. And those kinds of evolutionary ways of thinking are still embedded within us, even though we live in a very different world than we once did. Then there's the other side of things, which is that making things that are engaging all of our senses is extraordinarily satisfying. It's satisfying in the moment of stirring and chopping and hearing something sizzle in the pan and smelling the aromas. That's viscerally satisfying, but then so is eating something that you've just made with your own two hands, and then also feeding it to other people is also viscerally satisfying. It's cueing your body with all of those feel-good hormones that we have evolved for. So again, it's about tapping back into, well, what activities did we evolve for? What are our bodies naturally going to reward us for doing? And cooking and eating with others is one of the most basic well-being activities that we could be partaking in.
I wonder how much society kind of drifted away, let's say over the last 100 years, society kind of drifted away from the simple appreciation of the things you just discussed. And you were talking about some of the, quote, more restrictive diets of the last 10 years. I mean, I think that some of the diets that are discussed on this program, I wouldn't even say they're diets. I would just say it's a way of eating.
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle, exactly. But you mentioned gluten-free. I think you mentioned paleo as well. I know you mentioned paleo in the book. We've also, we've looked at keto and low carb diets quite a bit. I've had someone on talking about the carnivore diet. There's a lot of people who listen to this who do intermittent fasting. Presumably, those are the kind of things that you have been looking at.
Yeah. And so what I have found, at least in my work, is that these diets are, just as you said, they're not really diets. They're a way of living, they're a way of viewing the world. And they're also a great conduit to community. It's
Yeah.
not just that we don't know where our food is coming from, but we are simply less connected to other people. We have less deep, meaningful relationships. There are a number of studies from around the world that show that the close number of confidants that people have has plummeted. People's participation in their religious communities or even their neighborhood communities, volunteering, all of that is down, right? But we need to feel connected. We need to feel as though we belong. And food is becoming a new way to find a sense of belonging and to find a community. So for the research for the book, I actually went to a vegan speed dating event
Oh,
in New York City,
wow.
which was super fun. And it was really interesting to talk to people and say, well, why are you at a speed dating event specifically for vegans? And it's exactly what you were talking about, right? Veganism, to most of these people, it was not about a diet. It was about a way of seeing the world, much more akin to a religion than to a diet.
Just a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Magnesium Breakthrough. Did you know there's one phase of sleep that almost everybody fails to get enough of? And this one phase of sleep is the most important one. It's important for rejuvenation and repair, controlling hunger, weight loss hormones as well, even boosting energy. And this podcast is all about energy. And I'm talking about the deep sleep phase, which apparently almost all of us don't get enough of. I measure it every night on my Oura ring, and I get very frustrated when I haven't had enough. If you don't get enough deep sleep, you'll probably struggle with cravings and slow metabolism, and maybe even premature aging as well. And a big reason for not getting enough deep sleep is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population are deficient in magnesium. That is why I always supplement with magnesium. Every day. Magnesium Breakthrough. It increases GABA, which encourages relaxation at a cellular level. And I've known for a long time that it just helps me sleep better. Take magnesium in the evening, take a magnesium supplement, it helps you sleep better. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that not all magnesium products are created equal. And in reality, your body needs all 7 forms of magnesium, especially when it comes to sleep. And that is why Magnesium Breakthrough are our podcast partners. And that is why I take Magnesium Breakthrough. I'm taking it every day. Funnily enough, my deep sleep scores on the Oura ring are better than ever before. So I'm quite pleased with that. I don't want to humbly brag too much, but up to about 2.5 hours of deep sleep every day on the Oura ring. So, if you would like to try Magnesium Breakthrough, they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee, free shipping on selected orders as well, and you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough by using the code ZESTOLOGY10. So, 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough by using the code ZESTOLOGY10. It is the best aid I know for boosting deep sleep. Make sure you go to bioptimizers.co.uk, use the code Zestology10. You can go to bioptimizers.com if you're anywhere else in the world, use the same code, and Zestology10 will help you with your sleep, help you create more GABA, and help you to encourage relaxation at a cellular level. Right, back to the show. And then looking at the influence of technology and diet and how they intersect, were there times when you felt quite depressed looking at the technological aspect of it all?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that it goes two ways though, right? I mean, I think that there is power in growing awareness of the power that technology has, because it's also within our own purview to control what time we spend on tech. And there are a number of things that I employed that I changed about my own relationship to technology as my research went on, like turning off notifications, changing the color scheme on my phone. I've actually been thinking a lot lately about the fact that I've been a bit too attached, I think, to my phone. I need to kind of do a bit of a tech detox for myself. Being at home all the time, it's really difficult to keep the screens away.
Yes.
So I need to be more conscious of that for myself. But we live in a world where these companies, meaning Facebook, and the like, and their brethren, are benefited. They benefit from keeping us attached and keeping us addicted. And part of that means that those behaviors are not always healthy. They're not always of benefit. And in many ways, the way that they keep us attached to these devices continue to remind me over and over again of the ways that big food has kept us attached to junk food. It's by tapping into our innate evolutionary tendencies. So, for example, with a packet of Oreos or Doritos, those packaged goods are tapping into our desire for sugar, salt, and fat, right? And then turning that into overdrive. The same thing is happening on social media. It's a desire for knowledge. Again, that's an element of safety. We want to know more all the time. So the more we click, the more stories we see. That is that evolutionary tendency run amok. And then the same thing for belonging. We are being kind of fed this narrative that if we just get likes or hearts or upvotes, that we're going to feel good. And the reality is you get a short hit of dopamine, but you don't get the long-term endorphin kick that hugging somebody or even just looking somebody in the eye is going to give you. The benefit or the upside, I guess the optimistic lens on this is it's all really new. And these technologies entered our lives so rapidly that I think that our relationship to them can also change quite rapidly. And all it really requires is an increase in awareness. And I think that those who are paying attention to the things that your listeners are paying attention to, such as questioning the food system, questioning, well, what actually makes me feel good instead of just accepting the food narratives being given to them. Those are the same types of people who I hope will be, the next step is, well, okay, what's my relationship to technology? How is that making me feel well or making me feel unwell?
That's easier said than done, though, isn't it? I mean, you were just saying you feel like you're...
Yeah, but the same thing for food.
Yes, yeah.
Right? I mean, changing what you eat is hard. It is a lifestyle choice, right? I mean, it changes. You need a lot of time, you need a lot of planning, a lot of research, a lot of dedication to change the way that you eat. And it is the same thing for technology. And I got to say, once you put those parameters up, I actually think that it is easier to adhere to than you would think. And part of the reason why I'm saying I need to do a kind of tech detox again is because I, at least at this point, have the awareness that I'm feeling less well. And I'm able now to say, well, what has changed in the way that I'm spending my time? And it's that I'm spending more time on Instagram. I just published a book, and doing promotion in the time of a pandemic is basically impossible. And it's required more time on social media. But it makes me sad. So I'm just going to have to figure out a schedule for myself.
Yeah.
And put up parameters.
It's complex, isn't it? Because is sad the right word? Does it actually make you sad on Instagram? Or is it just that you're not as happy as when you're doing other, you mentioned that sense of community. Well, if you're sharing a picture of food on Instagram, that's probably not quite as enjoyable as actually sitting down with friends and enjoying that plate of food.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like this double-edged sword. Right now, when it's pretty much impossible to sit down with others and enjoy a plate of food, posting a picture of food and getting likes from a community can be a fine substitute. But I was able to talk to a number of researchers who exclusively research the emotional impact of time on social media. And overwhelmingly, the main impact of Facebook and Instagram on us is inducing feelings of envy and jealousy.
Yeah.
In fact, I read one study that showed that people who put up a selfie actually recorded lower rates of self-esteem, because you're putting up a picture in order to get validation from a bunch of people who don't actually know you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very different. I mean, to go back to like what I've learned from this process, it's also why I don't share I don't share a lot on social media usually, but like pictures of my daughter, I set up a separate account off of social media. That's just a photo album that friends and family can see.
Yeah.
The people who genuinely care about me, who are there in a time of crisis, who really want to watch my daughter grow up. And then I don't feel pressure if she doesn't look great in a photo, or if she's eating a food that other people would perhaps think, oh my God, I can't believe you're feeding that to her. I just don't have to worry about it, because it's only people who genuinely love me are I'm sharing those moments with.
Have you found, I mean, you don't mind talking about being a parent, do you?
No, not at all.
No, I mean, have you found that being a parent starts to make you think about community in a different way? Because certainly we've had the conversations about how it is very different being a parent from even how our parents did it. And certainly ancestrally, we just haven't got that sense of community in the same way. And
Oh my gosh.
we're very keen to build that as much as possible. But,
Yes.
I mean, going to nursery is not quite the same as having the tribe to look after your kids for you.
Exactly. I've been thinking about like, well, what would I write about next? And this to me is, there are other people who potentially are better set up to write this book, but I'm fascinated by this subject because the rates of postpartum depression are extremely high. And I think it's completely tied to exactly what you're talking about. There's also postpartum depression, by the way, for partners of those who actually had the baby. It's not just about mothers, it's also about fathers or, other partners. And this is a really big dilemma in our society today. And I do think that it's one of kind of the most stark examples of where those foundational community elements are missing. People go through pregnancy in isolation now. I actually really noticed this. My first pregnancy ended in miscarriage, and there was this taboo around talking about it that I had noticed. And people had said, well, don't tell anybody that you're pregnant before 12 weeks. And I was like, well, why? Because when I did lose that pregnancy, I needed community.
Yes. Yeah.
And not telling people had made it seem like, well, is it my fault that the pregnancy didn't work? It's like, well, no, it turns out that 30% of pregnancies end up in miscarriage.
Yeah.
And my mind was blown. It was like, where are all the people who are experiencing this? And once I started talking about it, I found a community.
Yeah.
But I think that, oh my gosh, especially right now, I am feeling the isolation of being a parent. And my husband and I, we just purchased a home, which I'm super excited about. We'll have more space. We're thinking about it as like, well, if we have to quarantine, we'll quarantine there. I'm in the US, so things aren't going well in terms of the pandemic.
Yes, I didn't want to bring it up too much.
Yeah.
Where in the US are you?
I'm in Chicago. It's actually being handled very well in Chicago, all things considered. But, I don't have a whole lot of, talking about lack of trust in government institutions. I just don't have a lot of faith in our system right now. So we're planning for quarantine for another year at least in our minds, just to kind of set us up. And we very consciously chose a house that's right next to a playground. Because my husband and I were like, we need a community. We need to find people. We don't want to raise our daughter alone. I'm feeling so guilty about her lack of social stimulation right now. Even though she is very little, as we were talking about, she probably doesn't really notice. But, I think that these are aspects of the core experiences of life that have changed in our more modern society. And I don't know that we give enough space and time to think about what the emotional ramifications are, and how it impacts our well-being.
I agree.
So, yeah.
I've worried a lot about that for people, especially people on their own. I mean, imagine having to isolate for 3 months and not having a cuddle with someone. I mean, it's just not natural, is it?
No. And actually, so I mentioned at the beginning, we had a loss in the family. So I was at a funeral about 2 weeks ago, and grieving without being able to touch people.
No.
It is so horrible. I can't put it into words, but at the funeral, we were allowed to gather, with space outside. but you can't hug. And I found, though, that even giving an elbow bump to people was more comforting.
Yeah.
It was very strange, but it was like even like elbow to elbow contact gave me a somewhat satisfying sense of comfort. But it was interesting to even observe the physiological response that I had to that like very minor form of touch.
Yeah.
And it really was more comforting than just, waving to people. But I think that being alone in isolation, listen, this is what we do to people in prison. This is punishment.
It is.
There's no other, I mean, it's house arrest.
I worry that there is a mental health pandemic kind of taking place.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. Without question. Because there was already.
Yeah. And of course, it's hastened a lot of, the work from home culture is not going to go away now, is it? A lot of people I drove through central London today and it is just amazing. It's like a nuclear bomb's hit or something. There's just no one around. It is absolutely dead. There is nobody in the offices. The streets are completely empty. Even though now the advice here is you can go back to work.
Oh, really?
And I just don't think that will ever go back. I mean, where I work at a TV channel here in the UK, and I just don't know if the offices will ever be as busy as they were back in February. I just don't know. But of course, all that, whilst it is very nice to be able to roll out of bed and in your pajamas roll up to your laptop, you might not see anybody all day, and you might not do any exercise in the process.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm a writer. I also now run a nonprofit, so I finally have some colleagues who I see virtually. But I've been dealing with the work from home issue for many, many, many years, and my solution to it has always been go to a co-working space, go to a coffee shop, get out of the house, because otherwise I will still be in my pajamas at 1:00. And I won't leave the house for at least 48 hours. Unless I have some kind of structure to motivate myself out. At the same time, if you focus on well-being and energy, I am optimistic in some senses that perhaps the workplace expectations will shift. If employers are realizing that their employees can get work done without the commuting time, I'm curious to see whether it will become customary to work from home one day a week, or if people will start to better manage their time so that they're spending less time working. But I'll be very intrigued to see kind of what the data is that comes out of this crisis in terms of time people are actually spending working. It might be drastically higher than it was prior. I'm not sure.
You just hope that we had something called Clap for Carers every Thursday night for the first 3 months of the kind of lockdown, and everybody kind of went out in the street and clapped for the National Health Service. And I do feel like we've, talk about building a community. We moved to a new area about a year ago, just before the baby came along, and we've certainly got to know the neighbours really quite nicely. And there's a lovely community on the street, old and young. Everybody's kind of mucked in together, and that obviously is a hugely positive aspect of everything that's happened. And that's exactly what I want more than anything. I do a nice community. My best friends I love, but most of them it's an hour's journey to go and see them, even if it's just across London. But if you can be best mates with someone who's 2 doors down, that's brilliant, isn't it?
Right. I mean, that's the dream.
That's the dream.
And my father grew up in Chicago, and he is still friends with people on the street that he grew up on. In fact, one of his neighbors introduced my parents. Whatever it was, 45 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would love to have that kind of community. Again, that's why my husband and I were very strategic about living near a park. So we're like, okay, if there's people that are coming to the park, then they probably live nearby. And, and maybe that can be like a super node.
You don't want to be too keen when you're trying to make friends with people. Like,
no, I know. Hopefully those neighbors never listen to this podcast. They'll be like, wow.
Now, just before I ask you questions about the book that you would recommend and also the tip for more energy, what diet do you follow?
I follow See, it's a lifestyle choice.
It's a lifestyle.
More than anything, I try to eat as sustainably as possible, but I have a very broad view of that. So I try to get like trash fish, quote unquote trash fish.
Yeah.
I eat a lot of mollusks because they clean the water. If I'm going to eat meat, I make it regenerative meat. I found a regenerative farmer locally that I can source meat from for special occasions. But I eat mostly vegetarian, I would say. And the biggest thing in our household is we limit our food waste. So I am a really big fan of using everything of what you've got. I don't really understand fully in our culture why we throw away so many tasty, amazing things. And so I pride myself on my ability to figure out what is tasty, what can I use that others might toss in the bin, and anything that we can't use is composted. So that's really my biggest passion, is limiting food waste as a conduit to living sustainably.
Oh, great. I interviewed B. Johnson, who wrote the Zero Waste Lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're doing. I mean, it's great. And I think step 4 of 5 is composting, which I haven't got that far, but I'm very impressed that you have. And that's brilliant. And I'm sure it's not that hard, is it?
It's super easy.
Is it?
No, it's super easy. Well, in London, I'm sure that there are services to come pick it up.
There are. That's what we get our food waste picked up. Yeah. So we save the food waste separately. But, ultimately, it'd be quite fun to do it ourselves.
Yeah, it's super easy. If you have a yard, there's a number of different composters, but you'll just put in your food waste. You can also put in any like basic paper waste, like newspapers. Even if your toilet paper rolls don't have glue on them, which some of them don't, you can add those too.
Wow.
And then your leaves, and then like you literally just water it and turn it every so often. And then suddenly you have this amazing, gorgeous soil that you can use to amend any of your garden items. And this is what I did when I lived in Brooklyn, and it helped me grow everything in our backyard. I grew sweet potatoes and okra and tomatoes and cucumbers. And there was no need to go to the store to buy fertilizer. I just had it there.
That's great. Does it smell?
No, if you do it correctly, meaning you need enough living matter and then dead matter, essentially, which is like dried leaves or the paper, and then some water, it shouldn't smell. I will say that we did at one point get some maggots, which looked absolutely disgusting, but it turns it into compost much faster. So it's actually a good thing. I Googled it because I was like, what do I do? And it turned out some people actually buy maggots to put into their compost bins.
Yeah.
So that sounds absolutely atrocious. If you don't like that idea, I say just leave the lid closed and you won't know.
These things are a learning process, though. I made yogurt for the first time a few times over lockdown, and it is a lot of fun. But let me tell you, one batch of yogurt, I never want to think about what I saw in that pot ever again.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the other thing, though, that I think when you're talking about like what gives you energy. This is I have tried to become more and more mindful of not just my waste, but in thinking about, well, why am I wasting this when it's nutrients? And I think a lot of what gets lost in this disconnect between the source of our food and how we eat it, and also, everything in between of who is harvesting it, who is shipping it, who is packaging it, etc., is that every single thing that we eat, no matter what lifestyle of eating you adhere to, every single thing that we eat is taking nutrients from the soil and infusing that into our own bodies, right? It doesn't matter if you are eating another animal, if you are eating another plant, that animal and that plant are thriving off of nutrients that were once in the ground. And those same nutrients are then fueling your own existence.
Yeah.
And we are so intimately tied to the earth that, to me, staying mindful of that connection is also what helps me choose what to eat, what not to eat. And also, these processes that may seem gross on the surface, they seem kind of icky. When you really look at it, you're like, wow, that's amazing. You think about the process of turning what was a waste product back into nutrients that can then fuel new life and fuel your own health, perhaps. And to me, I find endless inspiration in that. And I am extremely hopeful, actually, that we have these communities such as yours that are thinking more critically about what we eat, how we eat, when we eat, with whom. Because at the end of the day, it's that kind of reevaluation that needs to happen so that we can more fully enjoy our food and benefit from it in a more holistic way.
Well, likewise, I feel very inspired, and in a quiet moment tonight, I'm going to be Googling composting. So,
okay.
You know,
perfect.
Now, what is one book that you would recommend, and one tip for living with more energy and vitality?
So I'm actually gonna recommend a book that's from my high school years, which is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh yeah.
So I'm giving you a heavy hitter. But just to fit the theme of the podcast, for me, it was the first book that I read that really made me question and think about vitality and how much people can endure and still be resilient. And I think that right now it's an important thing to go back to remind ourselves of how resilient human beings are, the things that can come out of difficult experiences. I am culturally Jewish, but my mindset is more Buddhist, and I like to think about the beautiful things that come out of destruction. And so I do recommend Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And then, did you have one other question for me?
Yes, but just on that theme, by the way,
okay.
I read that book after someone else recommended it on this podcast, but I want to go back and read it again because they didn't mention the word vitality and that book, and it's interesting that you've mentioned that because obviously that is a big theme of mine, and I'd love to reread it again with that in mind, if you know what I mean.
I mean, yeah, I don't know that Viktor Frankl uses the term vitality.
No.
I'm not sure that he does, but that is really what it's about. It's right. I mean, it's about finding a life worth living, even in the darkest moments of human history.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary that he's been able to do that. But I mean, hundreds of thousands of other people have been able to endure just horrific situations and come out, I wouldn't say better for it, but certainly strong and optimistic and inspired and able to observe beauty in life.
Yeah.
And I think that that's incredibly inspiring. And at least for me, I need reminders like that right now.
Yeah. I've noticed with my American friends, there is a particular kind of end of days existential worry about the state of the world at the moment, which there isn't amongst my British friends.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I have gone down the rabbit hole, and I try very, very hard. We're talking about how to maintain well-being and our relationship to technology. A big thing for me over the last few years, really. I'll talk about politics and whatever. But since Trump was elected, I just decided I couldn't watch the news and read the news the same amount.
Yeah.
And I actually think that probably Trump's fans feel similar. I think they also feel like the end of days is coming because, there's this idea that the power of white Christians is coming to an end in the U.S., which for a lot of people is very, very frightening. They feel like others in their own country. And then I can speak on behalf of kind of the other side here, which is that oh my gosh, it is so unnerving to turn on the television and feel as though our democracy has turned into an authoritarian regime, and that there's no way out of this. That's my fear. And that might be the reality. And I just, I try to maintain a perspective that there's, it's a big world and a long stretch of time. And I do think that there are more good-natured people in this world than there are bad, and no one person is good or bad. But there are times, the Democrat, the liberal, the humanitarian inside of me it's very frightening right now. It's very, very frightening. You know, we have kids in cages at the border who are being taken away from their parents. And, oh my gosh, I could go on and on. You don't even want to know what's happening at the border right now. Parents
I've unleashed an absolute.
Sorry. It's horrific. I mean, if you talk about the Holocaust, I actually think that Viktor Frankl is coming out of the Holocaust, but I do think that there are elements of what's happening at the border that are reminiscent, not the mass death, but they're saying to parents, you can save your child from these COVID filled detention centers, but you have to give up all of your rights as their parent, or you can leave your child in the detention center and like maybe see them again someday. It's horrific. You've gotten me on a rough tangent.
Well, yes,
Sorry.
but listen, you're not the only American who I've had pretty dark conversations with recently, and I have noticed there is a particular, and as you say, on both sides of the political spectrum as well. Yeah,
I think both sides are suffering in their own ways, and I do have, I do respect that there's multiple ways of experiencing this moment, and it's. I guess if I'll give one other book for those who are interested in this particular topic, Strangers in Their Own Land. If you want to be working on empathy and understanding the other side, I loved the book Strangers in Their Own Land, which is about it's a sociologist who writes about the quote unquote true story of those on the opposite end of the political spectrum of which I adhere to. But it has helped me gain empathy. And a sense of understanding of what the perspective is on the other side and where that comes from and what that's motivated by.
Okay, that sounds excellent. In that case, let's leave the books and finish on a bit more of an upbeat note. What is one recommendation that you would have for living with more energy and vitality? And I wonder if it's come out of some of the research that you did for this book, or as you say, kind of looking into the whole wellness industry over the last however many years it's been.
Yeah, so for Hungry, the book is divided into 3 different sections: control, community, and purpose. And I think that the way to increase energy, which I take to mean vitality and well-being, really is 3-pronged. So I would say I'm going to give you kind of my top 3.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Things that I do for well-being. One is taking control of my time via turning off notifications, limiting screen time. Like, set parameters for yourself, stick to it. That's a big thing. Take control of that. Take control of your own time, your own screen time. The second is invest in the most important relationships. Pick up the phone and call people. Do FaceTime. Think about those who are going to be there when times get rough, and invest your time and energy in those relationships instead of likes and upvotes and hearts. I guarantee you it will bring you more energy and more love into your life. And then finally, I'd say make something with your hands that is tangible. And if you can also add in some time outdoors, absolutely do that. It is essential for energy and well-being.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to go spend some time outdoors and then Google composting. Eve, Thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you. I've loved that. We've both gone down some worthy rabbit holes. Where can people find out more about you and, of course, the book as well?
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's eveturow-paul.com, and I go by those 3 names on all of social media as well. Turow is Turow, and then Paul, like the first name, Paul. And then the book is more information at thehungrybook.com.
Fantastic. Well, look, very best of luck with the book, and thank you so much. A really thought-provoking chat, and absolutely brilliant to talk to you.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks to Eve, and thank you for listening. And it's so important, isn't it, being part of a tribe? When we meet the people who live around us, we have to try not to be too thirsty. And what I mean by that is, when someone's really keen to be your friend, the word you use for that is thirsty. You're being a bit thirsty, mate. But it is nice to meet the people around you, isn't it? And it's nice to feel part of a tribe and nice to feel connected to other people. And especially in the age of coronavirus and lockdown, that's harder than ever before. We're kind of more separated. It's definitely a priority of mine. And I would definitely think, just like Eve, very carefully, if I ever moved anywhere else apart from London, whether there was that same element of community that I feel like we're building here. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you to my product partners, Magnesium Breakthrough. Oh, what a brilliant product Magnesium Breakthrough is. It's become a regular part of my stack, a word that always makes me slightly chuckle. I like the word stack. It's become a regular part of my stack. Every day I have Magnesium Breakthrough, and I personally think it helps with sleep, with aching muscles, with recovery, but mostly with sleep. Oh, it definitely helps. When I don't have it, when I don't take magnesium or enough magnesium, I get, and I know this isn't really a selling point because I don't know if a lot of people get this, but I get kind of jerky legs. Have you ever had that? It's not that nice, but one way to get rid of it is magnesium. But it's not just that, it just helps in general having more magnesium, and that is kind of scientifically proven. And it's also proven that the diets that we eat now are massively deficient in magnesium compared to kind of 60 years ago because of the way that the soil has been farmed over the years. So Magnesium Breakthrough with all 7 forms of bioavailable magnesium is a good way to rectify that. And you can head to bioptimizers.co.uk with a Z. Use the code Zestology10 for 10% off. Zestology10, remember the 10 on the end. You get 10% off, which can be, quite a little bit of dollar off your purchase. And if you're anywhere else in the world, you can head to bioptimizers.com and use the same code, Zestology10. So they've got loads of other good supplements as well, including, if you're like me and you don't eat gluten, they have a product called Gluten Guardian. Gluten Guardian, you can take it when you think you might have eaten gluten. And it basically contains this one enzyme that helps break gluten down. It's a brilliant idea. You will also get 10% off that and anything else you buy on there. So a little kind of secret heads up for you by using the code Zestology10. Right then, I'm almost at my house now, so I'm definitely getting my steps up for today. Thank you for listening to Zestology. Have a zesty week, and I'll see you next time.